HR workers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen an employee screwed over by the company? I worked for an oil company and lived through mass redundancies when the oil went belly up. They sent out a list of which positions were being made redundant, with numbers for how many people currently held that role and how many they were cutting it to. So if it said buyers current, for consultation, 3 feet, you knew that if you were a buyer you'd be under scrutiny and 25% of your team would be gone soon. I sat at my desk and opened the email, looked for my position, no redundancy for me. The girl next to me opened hers and saw her position current, 1 consultation, 0 feet. That's how she learned she'd lost her job. Not in HR, but I can think of 2 examples. There was a fire drill and upon returning it was discovered that not everybody returned. Apparently it was a literal fire drill where some people were told that they had been let go and this was their way of having them leave. The other example is my dad, who had been with a huge multinational company that tried to fire him a week or so before his 30-year work anniversary. Fortunately for him, the manager forgot to give him the necessary paperwork on time and he was fired but made it to the 30-year mark, which has extremely heavy implications on pension and retirement. We had rifts back in 08. They started in February in the Midwest. One gal was escorted out of the secure area, told she was gone and to leave the building. She was okay with being rifed, however. It's February in the Midwest and it's cold outside. All her stuff was inside the secure area and they wouldn't allow her to back in. They wouldn't get her stuff for her. She had to stand out in 20 degrees Fahrenheit weather until someone she knew would call a buddy to get her hat, coat, purse, car keys. Someone messed up here. I've unfortunately seen a lot of rifts, and HR always asks the person what they need from their desk and then goes and gets it. Sometimes they walk the person back to their desk, depending on the situation, but I've never seen someone shoved out of the office without their keys and coat. Probably was a very junior HR person who wasn't briefed properly. A colleague of mine was flown from his office in the field to headquarters under the pretense of a leadership meeting and fired immediately once he arrived. He was on a plane back home 2 hours later. The boss didn't feel like traveling. I hope he at least got some miles. In 2008 my company had huge riff of 100 or so people. The day it happened was just terrible. I walked into a conference room and found the HR guy crying in the dark. 30 days later they let him go. 2008 sucked. I'm just an IT guy so I don't always know the whole story, but it feels bad locking someone's account on their PC and having them find out that way. And then of course, moments later an hour person shows up in their office. I had a friend years ago and she worked security at First Union Bank's main IT campus. She told me the way they let people go is they would come to badge in through the door and their card would not work. Out came HR and security where they would escort the person to their desk to get their things and then walked right out the door. She told me about 3 weeks after this started one Saturday night around 5 PM their ATM system crashed and took them about all night to recover. She told me she thinks someone left them a going away gift. She told me the way they let people go is they would come to badge in through the door and their card would not work. Whenever my badge does not work or I am unable to log into my computer, I am terrified that I was just fired. I used to work in a warehouse and one time an employee got seriously injured. His arm and leg were seriously fricked up. This guy worked out a lot so management pulled him into the office and began to speak to him. So you hurt your arm at the gym and now want to blame us? A pallet of heavy things literally tumbled over near him. If he didn't move right away he could have easily gotten crushed. Management thought it was a scam. Do you know what insurance fraud is? Tell us the truth. We know everything. You can't lie to us. The guy was stunned. He wanted to use his health insurance but the management wasn't hearing it. This continued for some time. A few hours at least. I guess someone overheard because 3 guys from the union showed up pee as heck. Really pee. There was screaming, shouting, and then one mentioned that perhaps we should get the Department of Labor and the insurance company involved. I guess that was enough to convince him. He let the employee use his insurance and things went on for a while. Apparently, This guy had a habit of doing this to everyone who was injured. Injury happens. A day later, etc. He literally accused someone of working with a broken arm for 2 weeks before going to the hospital. I think someone either reported him or the union stepped in because he has disappeared. Thought unions were supposed to be useless. Allow me to post a happy story involving layoffs and HR. But first, a little background. Where I live, employers could give out temporary contracts for a total of 3 years. After that, they had to let you go or offer you a permanent contract. Work somewhere for 3 years and a single second equals permanent contract. This girl was on her 3rd year with all signs pointing towards a permanent contract. Her evaluations were through the roof. She was one of the more productive workers in the department. Good rapport with customers. Co-workers liked her and she loved working there. It should have been a done deal. However, 2 months before she hits 3 years, the company announces a downsizing. As part of this downsizing, all temporary workers will not have their contracts renewed or made permanent. Department head tries to argue with HR, citing everything I mentioned above, but they can't do anything. Downsizing like this is part of labor law as well as the CBA, and they literally cannot make exceptions, but they can offer her transition help, i.e. helping her find a new job. Girl doesn't want to do but is convinced by the department head to in anyway, so she brings her CV and the proof of all the training she's had and meets up with the HR rep. HR rep stops at one of her internships she did right before she came to her current job, asks her a lot of questions about it. Then he asks her a lot of questions about how long she's been working at the company. Then he steps out for a good 10 minutes before returning with the head of the HR department. They ask her again to confirm her employment history. Turns out the company she interned at was taken over roughly a year before by the company she now worked for. Also, internships count as work experience, and when the takeover was finalized, the payroll was transferred on a 1-to-1 basis, including past experience. So officially her employment with our company was not 2 years, 11 months, but 3 years, 2 months. As a result, her previously temporary contract was now permanent by law and she wasn't laid off. I worked almost 100% on one of the major projects at my company. It was one of only a couple whales that was keeping the lights on. This was during the major oil crash around 2014 or so. The project manager booked a long vacation way in advance, and the client decided at the last minute that all the work needed to be revisited. Not by our fault, just compliance with a new regulatory procedure. This was actually great news because it gave a lot of people work to do, which was pleasantly surprising news when layoffs are happening weekly. So we could not say no. A more senior co-worker stepped up and took over. Everything went great and we got the deadline on time. But it took a lot of overtime on their part. They really came through. I and other co-workers mentioned them by name during performance reviews to commend them. They were laid off a couple weeks later. It was not announced. They stopped informing the staff of layoffs because apparently it was hurting morale. I was already planning on leaving to go to grad school, but I could have changed my mind until that point. I pretty just mentally checked out, ignored everyone and counted down the days until I left. Just remember that if you work for a huge company, you owe them absolutely nothing beyond your scheduled hours. The people deciding your fate could be entire tiers above whatever low-level manager you answer to, and you will probably never see their face or even know their name. You may get dropped on an impulse to make their spreadsheet numbers look better for their next meeting. I was the screwed over employee here. I'm colorblind. My boss gave me a work task that was color coded in a way that I couldn't see, based on color coding of spreadsheet cells, where each color had a specific meaning and I couldn't distinguish all of them. When I told my boss about this, she decided to write me up for it, under the assumption I was lying to get out of work. I went straight to HR with a copy of the write-up. The rep told me that there was exactly one way I could get the write-up off my record. I could use our tuition reimbursement program to go take a remedial art class at the local community college, so that you can finally learn your colors, she said. That's when I found out that color blindness isn't protected under the ADA. This was right about the same time that I stayed late one day to cover for a co-worker who ran out of insulin in her pump. I stayed about 45 minutes while she went home, got a refill, and came back. The next day I was written up for the unauthorized overtime. Another co-worker went into the same HR rep to see if she could put her son on her insurance. She was told that no, she couldn't do that, since her son lived in Hawaii, and Hawaii isn't part of the United States. I decided about that time it just wasn't worth staying at that company. Her son lived in Hawaii, and Hawaii isn't part of the United States. So they're not just terrible, they're terrible and stupid. Obligatory not an hour worker, but my college roommate was a temp in our office for college credit. She came home one night absolutely disheveled, makeup smeared, heels in hand, just rough. In a nutshell, her supervisor made her participate in firing a woman for creating a hostile work environment. Seems cut and dry, right? Turns out the hostility was directed at a man the woman accused of molesting her daughter. The woman obviously went batshit crazy, crying, begging to keep her job, the works. Told my roommate the entire story about how she dated the guy for years. Thought he was great, but now her 13-year-old daughter had some kind of STD that the guy had given to both of them. And naturally, the mom threatened to kill the guy. The HR supervisor wasn't having it, had security escort the woman out. My roommate asked the supervisor if she thought the mom was telling the truth. The supervisor, cold as ice, probably. We hire some really suspicious people. She shouldn't have left her daughter alone. That broke something in my roommate and she dropped her business program 3.5 years in. I think she graduated with a degree in biology or something 2 years later. She shouldn't have left her daughter alone. What the frick? Sears Canada, going through bankruptcy. Many employees were laid off with no severance while the executives were getting 6-figure bonuses. Those bonuses could have covered many employees' severance. Made an employee come in at 6:30 for the morning rush hour only to tell her to leave after 10 minutes because they were a bit overstaffed. At least give her 2 hours for her troubles. My Fortune 500 company was going through downsizing years back. Everyone knew their turn could be coming, so it wasn't the best of environments. One woman who had been with the company for 20 years was applying for jobs just to see what was out there, but really wanted to stay with current company. She ended up getting an offer elsewhere. So she approached our manager at the time and told him the situation and asked for advice. Boss basically told her nothing is on the horizon, but do what is best for her. So she turns her notice in. The very next day, RIFs announced, entire department being let go, except the manager. Everyone gets a severance package, except for lady who put notice in the day prior. She lost 40 weeks of pay, 2 per year worked. Boss knew the RIFs were coming. He could have advised her to wait a day in a roundabout way. Frick you, Derek. On the bright side, she had a new job right away, while the rest of us took some time off and competed for the same open jobs in the area. Not an hour worker, but last week 3 employees were fired in the company I work in. The lady in charge of terminating people was known in the company as Death. Cause when she called you in a room, crap was going down. She fired 2 people following our ridiculous protocol, which basically kicks people out and then someone else has to pick up their stuff from the desk and take it to them outside. We usually fire them first thing in the morning, so they don't waste a whole day of work for a company they no longer work for. After doing those 2 terminations, her boss called her in her room and fired her too. The big fish eats the little ones. 1. Owner-founder sells the company to a big corporation, makes a huge profit, and fricks off to the tropics. 2. New management starts to fire people, over 100, the first 6 months. 3. New management then makes the place so miserable, people start losing it and quitting, the second 6 months. 4. Place gets so bad, employees threaten to unionize. Company says if they do, all jobs will be terminated, and services exported to India. Worst crap I've ever seen. Frick big corporations. I don't understand buying a company only to mismanage it into ruin at breakneck speed. Not HR, and I might be a little late to the party, but there was this guy who came to work for us about a year ago. This is hard manual labor, and the guy had quit slinging dope on the street to come make an honest living to support his family. He was having trouble dealing with it at first, but he adjusted and ended up being one of the hardest workers on the floor. Always working those 12-hour shifts, staying busy that whole time. Anyway, he works with us for a good long while before his 19-year-old daughter dies suddenly in her sleep. He, of course, gets a few days off. They probably would have given him more time, but he really couldn't afford to miss any work. Dude held it together so dang well while he was at work. Man, you could tell for sure he was going through some crap, but he stayed busy still. Well, that next week I guess he decided he needed a little more time off, but he didn't call out and stayed home for 2 days. After returning from that 2 days, he was immediately escorted out of the building and fired. That's sad. Not HR, but I was forced out of a job in a crappy way and want to share. I moved to another state and got a job at an alternative school for kids who had been kicked out of public school for emotional and behavioral issues. The company spent a few hundred hours training me and I learned a lot more on the job. It was difficult at times, but I enjoyed the work and the people I worked with. After a few months I felt comfortable in my role. Then, for some reason still unknown to me, the bosses wanted me gone. I was called into a meeting with 2 supervisors who said that we were now overstaffed. Lie. We had 3 vacancies, and that I had an exciting opportunity to move to another program. They wanted to move me to our sister program where you work one-on-one in a public school, which can suck if you have a tough kid, and in that program, they wanted me to be a sub-floater, so I could get a text at 5 AM telling me I had to go to a school an hour away to work with an emotionally unstable kid I've never met before. So I thought about it the next day and told my supervisor that I wanted to stay where I was, but that I would be flexible and go to the other program for a few months if they needed me there, or be a permanent one-on-one with a kid, just not a permanent floater. I didn't hear anything for a week and then get called into a meeting with both supervisors and the head director. The head director says that the other program would be better for my professional development, balls, and then asks me to tell her 3 of my professional goals that I'm working on. Clearly trying to catch me off guard. I make up something and then tell her my reasons for wanting to stay. I don't hear anything for a couple weeks, but the bosses are crappy and begin sending me emails for any mistakes I make that could easily have been said in person. For example, another staff and I were dealing with an escalated kid who had already bit me, and I was tapping my foot while watching him. The director came up behind me, loudly said, "You need to stop doing that in front of the kid." Then she had one of my supervisors write me an email the next day telling me I had to be conscious of tapping my foot or drumming my fingers, which is true, but doesn't require an email. Then, I get called into another meeting with the director and 2 supervisors, who tell me that I am getting moved to the other program. I gave my 2 weeks notice on the spot, which made my co-workers think I was a badass but didn't help the fact that I needed a new job. My director then still forced me to go to the other program for my last 2 weeks, so I didn't get the goodbye ceremony or anything at the alternative school and could do very little at the other program since they knew I wouldn't be there long. I ended up getting a job at a preschool with a much better boss, but it still frustrates me to think about the whole experience. Not HR, but I think the way I was fired by my last company was pretty crappy. I worked in marketing for a small company. The company was having problems and there were crazy internal power struggles which led to my firing. Basically crap rolls downhill. Boss wasn't meeting sales goals because the salespeople they hired and were buddies with couldn't sell water to someone dying of thirst and needed someone to blame. I went to the Christmas party and had the next 2 days off. The second day I had off I got a generic email saying my services were no longer needed. The other 2 people in my department got the same email. Turns out everyone else at the party, about 20 people, knew me and one of the other people, my supervisor, were going to get fired. The company's HR person, real professional, had told a couple people we were going to get fired and word spread. The third person who got fired was lined up to get my supervisor's job but got drunk at the party and told the boss it was a mistake to fire us, so she ended up getting fired too. Looking back, not only was it crappy to fire us a week before Christmas but also crappy to put us in a room of our co-workers who all knew we were about to get fired. I got fired right before Christmas too. A couple days later one of my boss's friends was doing my job. People can be crappy. HR guy here for a global financial services firm. We had an employee feature recently in a newspaper article on homelessness. where he was named specifically as working for the company. Clearly the journalist intended it to be read as a statement that even those in steady jobs can find themselves in difficult conditions. However, the partners saw differently. An email went to all employees asking not to contact the individual. We don't want to overwhelm him during this troubling time. While we were instructed to dismiss without notice for damaging the firm's reputation. Not a great day for all involved. The journalist would love to write a second article. First-hand witness because it was me. Worked at a biotech startup for a year. Saved them tons on in-house development of assay reagents. And had nothing but positive feedback. One of my co-workers was let go due to budgetary concerns. And was given a very generous severance. About a month later, my father passed away and I took a couple of days. When I come back, I'm asked to stay late for a few days, and then on a Tuesday I'm told that I'm being furloughed until they get a grant approved, but would for sure be brought back on. Lost health insurance, no severance offered, and they had already cancelled my ID badge and parking pass. Couldn't get back in to get my wallet and keys and whatnot, during which time my car was towed. I'm not HR, but was part of a layoff of 150 from the corporate office. I worked in IT and 4 other people were laid off along with me. The corporate campus was 3 buildings and HR was in the far building from us. So it was a long walk back with security for the cleaning out of the desks. Out of the 5 of us, I was the only one who didn't sign into the company email with my personal phone and the other 4 had their phones wiped on the walk back to our building. The job was whatever. All of us found others soon enough. But I will never forget my middle manager boss who was let go and had his phone wiped and lost all the pictures saved on his phone of his kids, including his toddler that died a few years earlier. Just sobbing. Note, this was many years ago after smartphones had come out, but before cloud storage was ubiquitous and automatic and free. Obviously he should have backed up his phone and or not signed up to our email with the remote wipe ability, but still pretty sad. Had a co-worker tell me about one of her previous jobs. Corporate and HR had required everyone meet at a neutral location for a business type luncheon. Upon arrival, the employees, 300 plus, were split into 2 different rooms. The people in room A were told they were losing their jobs due to some loss of stocks and being forced to downsize but were being offered a sizable severance. The people in room B were told they would be keeping their jobs but would also be taking the workload of those in room A. After the meeting, they all had to eat together as it was a requirement to be there. Dang, I think I would have been less P to be in the room that was fired. Company I used to work for tried to sue an employee into disclosing where he was going. This was a small MSP, didn't matter. They withheld the check of another and he had to get a lawyer and labor and industry involved to get his check. Tip of the iceberg. I worked for a company on contract. In HR, if you believe it, was a crappy company, so 6 weeks before the contract ended, I went to the boss and said that I was going to leave at the end of my contract. For the next 6 weeks I was person non grata in the HR department. I was removed from their group email list. I wasn't told about meetings. They went on 2-day training outside the office and I wasn't told. I arrived at work to an empty HR department for 2 days, etc etc. On my last day I was saying goodbye to people around the office and my boss comes down and demands that I come to a meeting and walks away. After 6 weeks of basically no contact, I was wondering why. Someone in another department said that they had planned a goodbye party for me. They treated me like crap for 6 weeks and then bought a gift, cake, balloons etc. I said, F that, snuck up to my desk, got my coat, left the building and drove away. Apparently they sat there for an hour paging me throughout the building before they realized that I had left. Good thing was, I didn't need them for a reference as a friend of mine owned his own company and gave me one saying I had worked there for the year. That's awesome. Target. Afternoon on a Saturday I go to punch in for electronic and the machine doesn't take my team member ID after several tries. Douchebag higher up shows up and gives me a condescending come over here. I get let go 4 days after already putting in my 2-week notice and they had already scheduled me for 2 weeks. Didn't even give me a check, just $800 cash. Not even hundreds but 20s singles and change. They really can't just call an employee or email them that they're being let go. Gotta go through all that BS. We had a company downsizing a few years ago and the company was looking to find ways of getting rid of people without paying redundancy. Basically find any possible misconduct issues and fire people. We had quite a few internet misuse cases, but one guy who had been at the company for 15 years was called into the office for running a gambling syndicate on company property. He was screwed over because this gambling syndicate he had run was a fantasy sports league that basically the whole company played, from managers to junior staff. He was fired in a meeting by a number of managers that had all been playing the fantasy league every year. Also, I will point out he ran the league in his own time, so before and after he clocked in and during breaks. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.